Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank all my colleagues in the House of Commons this evening for the opportunity to speak to this motion. As a proud Inuk woman of Labrador, the daughter of a mother of residential school, when we hear these stories through generations, we're always reminded each and every day of the trauma that they have endured and the legacy that it has left behind. What we're dealing with today is a horrible reality. It's a horrible reality of our past that has been uncovered. It has been revealed and unearthed of 215 innocent children in a mass grave in Kamloops. It is not only devastating, it is heartbreaking. It is an act against humanity, and on that, I think we all agree. It is an act against children who had no voice. They were alone. They were scared. They were silenced. And they were isolated. They were robbed of life, and they were buried with the same horror that they endured in society. Yesterday, as I stood in my riding next to two very strong moms, Jody Ishini and Tia Panashaway of the Sheshatshiu First Nation, along with Chief Eugene Hart, surrounded by so many children, so many moms, and so many dads, surrounded by survivors and victims of residential schools, surrounded by love and affection for each other and tears, so many tears. On behalf of all of them, on behalf of all the people of Labrador, I want to extend our love and support to those many families that are suffering this evening in this country, to those many Indigenous families who are feeling the loss, the void, and the heartache of what has happened. But I think we can all agree on several things, and that is there is much work to do in advancing not just the rights of Indigenous people in this country, but upholding the rights of innocent Indigenous children as well. We've talked so much about the harm that has been caused by the legacies of residential schools and the trauma that comes with it. But we also know that as we sit here this evening and we speak, that Indigenous people still face racism. We still face unacceptable injustices that are happening in many of our communities across the country. And I know that one by one, we have pledged our support to make a difference. We have pledged to ensure that we can restore language, culture. We can restore, once again, the proud legacy of Indigenous people. It's a long road and one that has to be shaped and led by Indigenous people themselves. But like every ill act, there has to be accountability. And I'm sure that many of you share the belief that I have, and that is that more accountability needs to come to bear. I really believe that the Catholic Church has yet to redeem itself in any way in recognizing what has happened at the hands of their institution. And that has been unacceptable. So while we pledge our support, and as the Government of Canada, we continue to move forward to bridge that gap for Indigenous people in this country, we need to do it with the support of all parliamentarians, of all provinces and all territories. That means that when we have legislation like UNDRIP, we have to be able to stand up and support it. That is part of reconciliation in this country. That is part of bridging that gap with Indigenous people. Every day I wake up not knowing what I'm going to hear next. I wake up today in a very small populated riding to find out two very young, beautiful people died by suicide again last night in my riding, one First Nations, one Inuit. This has to stop. The healing is not happening in a way that it should be. It is happening, but it is slow. How do we get it to move faster? How do we bridge that gap more? How do we ensure that every child has the opportunity to wake up in a warm home with a full belly? And that's where we need to focus. It's as basic as those things in many cases. Reconciliation with Indigenous people and recognizing that every child does matter is not difficult. It really isn't. But we need to do it faster. We need to move more at a more rapid rate than we have. And that includes us as a government, but it includes Indigenous leadership as well. It includes all of us working together to make sure these things happen. These are times of critical advancement for Indigenous people. Let's not lose this. Let's not bury this so we have to wait 10 more years for this to become a priority in the country. I am so proud of what our government has done to help Indigenous people. I have seen more Indigenous children get support in my riding in the last 5 years than I've seen in the 15 years before. I've seen more houses built in communities across my riding for Indigenous families than I've seen in 15 years before. I've seen more investments into food banks, into social support. We've revamped the social welfare system and the child care welfare system in this country to support Indigenous communities and Indigenous people. But there's still a lot more to do. A lot more.